For more on the Group of Seven Summit in Italy is Mene Ukueberuwa, a member of the Wall Street Journal editorial board. Mene, always good to see you. As we heard from Owen Jensen, abortion was not one of the main topics discussed at the summit, but of course it was referenced, and it even caused somewhat of a clash between Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni and French President Emmanuel Macron. What more can you tell us about this dust-up?
Absolutely. So it seems as if Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni went into the summit really feeling like she wanted to use her temporary role as president of the G7 to try to temper the language of the communique that the group would put out with regard to abortion. In the end, it does seem as if the final language does refer to universal access to women's health, but it doesn't use the word abortion. And Emmanuel Macron, who is going to be contending for election very soon, within the next couple of months, seemed to take this as an opportunity to try to burnish his own credentials in front of his pro-choice audience back home. And so he criticized Giorgia Meloni for stripping this language, suggested to Italian reporters that France doesn't share your values when it comes to moderation on abortion. Meloni defended her actions and said that in the end, what she said in the final communique was consistent with the language from last year, but it does seem as if in very subtle ways, these two leaders are trying to jostle over the fine details about how emphatically the G7 is going to espouse its dedication to abortion rights.
Yeah, and there was also some criticism over support for LGBTQ people, or what some had felt was a lack thereof in Friday's communique. Mene, what was the issue there?
Well, it was a very similar story. If you look at the communique that came out after last year's G7 in Hiroshima, the language about advancing LGBT rights was very explicit, whereas this year, under the leadership of Prime Minister Meloni, it was a much more moderate, more tempered statement. And so this is something that Macron also alluded to in his comments to reporters, and something that goes against the general direction of the G7, which tends to be very progressive and tends to see human rights as being totally bundled up with promoting an LGBT agenda. But that is very much not what Meloni ran on back home in Italy, and she wants to use her leverage to moderate their language.
Yeah, and meantime, one of the top issues, and the first one discussed, was migration and ways to combat human trafficking, and also investment into the countries where the migrants are coming from, like Africa. Talk to us more about that, and what type of consensus, if any, did the world leaders come to?
Well, it was bound to be one of the big topics of the summit because almost every country in the world, and particularly in Europe, is dealing with large migration crises. A lot of these leaders, particularly Macron, have had a big political hit because of their inability to deal with it. And so they knew they need to put out some statement, but many of them are actually very soft on the issue, are unwilling to actually take bold action to restrict illegal migration in their countries. And so what we got was just a commitment to invest in some of these countries where migrants are coming from, with the hope of improving the financial circumstances of those countries and giving less of an incentive for people to come in the first place. I think it's unlikely that there will be any real concrete action that comes out of it, but they knew that they wanted to go home and be able to say that they pledged to do something about the problem.
Yeah, Mene, with the summit wrapping up tomorrow, what do you think are the big takeaways from this year's meeting?
Well, the biggest really is a reaffirmation of their commitment to help the Ukraine war effort. You did see a pledge from President Biden specifically, and from all the nations together, that they're going to continue to fund the Ukraine war effort. And they also agreed to use seized Russian assets to help finance the Ukraine war effort. And so that obviously is not new. That's been one of the unifying factors of the G7 for the past couple of years. But it did show a renewed commitment to do that in a way that is going to be promising for those defenders of the Ukraine's effort in their war against Russia.
Mene, thank you as always for coming on. We appreciate your analysis. God bless.
Thanks a lot, Tracy.